lied. There was no biblical Jesus. The Bible says there was. Somebody lied. So to me, I want to know who lied, when, and why. Those are the questions that I'm interested in. So part one, why the Jesus story is false. There's two basic issues with the Jesus story. First of all, we have what I call the problem of the evidence, namely that we don't have any, that we're lacking in evidence. The second major issue is what I call the problem of the chronology. It relates to the datings of the writings in the Bible, in the New Testament, and in some other contemporaneous writings. So we'll see that in a moment. And unfortunately, we have nothing, absolutely nothing. Nothing from the whole life of Jesus, which runs roughly from 3 BC to the year 30. We have no evidence from that time. We have no evidence for decades after the time of Jesus. No contemporaneous writings, no eyewitness writings, no physical evidence, nothing, absolutely nothing for years. The problem of the chronology, let's look at the dates for a minute and then we'll see a little bit, give it an idea what's going on here. So Jesus dies, he's crucified in the year 30 AD. In 33 AD, Paul converts from Judaism to Christianity. He has a vision of the risen Christ. Paul is a key figure in the hoax. We'll come back to him a little bit later. But we have a huge gap in time. After Jesus dies, Paul converts. We have 20 years, fully 20 years, and we have nothing at all. No writings, no documentation by any of the Christians, by Paul, by the Romans, anybody. No writings for 20 years. In the next 20 years, from 50 to 70 AD, this is the dating of the 13 letters of Paul. At least half of those letters are fraudulent. In the year 70, the first gospel appears. This is the Gospel of Mark. This is generally dated to the year 70. That's the earliest of the 4 Gospels. The next 2 Gospels to appear seem to have been Matthew and Luke. Those were apparently written about the year 85. And the last Gospel was John, written about the year 95 AD. The Gospels are the only source of the documentation for our knowledge about Jesus. Documentation of his life history, what he said, the miracles. Everything comes from those 4 Gospels. And yet they date extremely late. Much later than you would expect. You would expect, I would expect, as soon as Jesus dies and is risen to heaven, immediately you would think his followers would document his life story. But it's even worse than that. If we look at the actual fragments, the physical remnants, pieces of the Gospels that we own, those are even later than those dates. It's not like we have Gospels from those early dates, not even close. So, for example, the oldest fragment from the Gospel of John is called P52. It's just a fragment of the Gospel. That dates to the year 125 AD. The oldest fragment of Matthew dates to 175 AD. Of Luke, it's 200 AD. And of Mark, is 250 AD. Even the Bible itself, I think people don't realize that the oldest physical Bible is actually much later than those periods. The oldest physical Bible, piece of actual document, is the Vatican Codex. It's held in Rome. It dates to the year 350 AD. So if the Bible was completely written by the year 100 AD, the Old Testament and the New Testament, but we have to wait 250 years to have a complete physical Bible, once again we have lots of problems. We don't know what changed, what edits occurred, what insertions were made, nothing. We have a huge gap in our knowledge. The other problem is for the non-Christian writings. The Christian writings cause a problem. The non-Christian writings are also a problem. The earliest non-Christian to write about the Christians was Josephus. He was a Jewish writer. In the year 93, he wrote a book called Antiquities of the Jews, and he gave one paragraph mentioned that there were Christians, that they existed, and there was this fellow named Christ that they followed, and that was it. It was just one paragraph in a long work, and he mentions them in the year 93, and that's it. The earliest Roman mention of the Christians is even later, in the year 115 AD. Tacitus, who's the great Roman historian, he writes a book called Annals. He gives 2 sentences to the Christians in his work in the year 115. Also in 115, Pliny is writing a letter to Trajan, the Emperor Trajan, and he's going on for 4 or 5 small paragraphs. He's complaining about the Christians, they're causing trouble. Pliny wants to punish them. But clearly they exist. But again, this is a very problematic issue from the Christian side. If the Romans, who were documenting everything that was going on in Judea at the time, they spent almost 100 years before they even wrote a single word about the Christians. That's really an astounding story. If Jesus died, was crucified, he performs his miracles, dies in the year 30, decades go by, and finally in the year 115 the Romans start to write about the Christian movement, then clearly it was so inconsequential or non-consequential that the Romans wrote nothing about it until almost a century later.